veikiausiai visi, kurie buvo pirmą paskaitą, tie patys pasirodė ir antroje paskaito, bet gal ir naujų žmonių. Aš jums pristatau Jean-Paul Petitimbert, naujosios kartos semiotiką, kuris skirtingai nuo Landovskio visiškai nėra žinomas Lietuvoje, bet semiotikų žurnale Akcija, kuriame yra nemažai jo straipsnių, jis yra vienas produktyviausių autorių. Ir aš dabar nežinau, ar ten galime ne tik prancūzišką kalbą perskaityti jo tekstų, šiaip jisai rašo taip pat ir anglų kalbą, tai bent jau internete gal galima surasti ir anglų kalbą jo tekstų, nes kaip matysite, mano manymu, jisai laisvai valdo anglų kalbą, todėl kad pats pirmasis jo išsilavinimas niekas negimsta ir semiotikais ir niekas dažniausiai savo pirmoju išsilavinimu nebūna semiotikais, ypač vyresnės kartos žmonių, tai jis savo pirmoju išsilavinimu buvo anglistas, vėliau studijavo komercinėje aukštoje mokykloje ir tapo marketingo specialistas ir į semiotiką atėjo gana vėlai iš reklamos marketingo srities. Ir kai atėjo į semiotiką, tai papuolė, susidūrė ne su Greimo semiotika, Greimo knygo jis nepažinojo, bet su jau tą vadinamąją postgreiminę semiotiką. Ir jį labiausiai sužavėjo Eriko Landovskio semiotika ir jis yra, galima būtų sakyti, sociosemiotikos, tos greiminės sociosemiotikos, kaip čia pasakyti, ištikimiausias šalininkas. Kita vertus, jis turėtų būti daug kam įdomus tuo, kad tai yra labai intensyviai praktikuojantis semiotikas. Jeigu toj postgreiminiai semiotikai nemažai yra tokių, kurie yra teoretizuojantis ir vis naujus modelius kuriantys semiotikai, tai Petitimbertas yra tas, kuris praktikuoja semiotiką ir kūrybiškai praktikuoja semiotiką ir įvairiausiose srityse, beje, ne tik marketingo. Iš marketingo srities jisai pragyvena, bet jis taip pat mėgina taikyti semiotiką visiškai kitoms sritim, kuriuose tai irgi mažai taikyta semiotika, kaip tarkime teologijos srity, religijos srity. Žodžiu, jis yra semiotikas praktikas ir kūrybingas praktikas ir manau, kad jūs to įsitikinsite klausydamėsi šio pranešimo. Jis kalbės angliškai, bet gali kalbėti prancūziškai, kas norės.
Oops, sorry. Good morning to all. Thank you for being so many to listen to what I have to say this morning. Basically, this contribution is about the notion of emptiness, as the title reads, but a certain understanding of this concept and how this concept can acquire in communication in general, but also in marketing and in product design, a certain value. So in order to do so, I will mostly rely on an example that originates from Japan. It's a global example, but it originates from Japan. It's the Muji brand. So I will explain later on what Muji is about. But basically what I will endeavor to do is showing how the interactional model that those of you who attended Eric Landowski's presentation yesterday know now, and how this the model can account for the value of emptiness, and how the regime of adjustment is a key to understanding how emptiness can lead consumers to make sense of what is offered to them to be beheld or to be used, as well as how it has somehow turned it has turned into a brand philosophy, Muji's philosophy, that has somehow reshuffled the old brandscape, the old marketing landscape, and the old marketing paradigm as a result. So before I get into the heart of the matter, I would like to put everything in perspective by briefly reminding us of what we all have in mind when we think of advertising. So I want to somehow pave the way for my talk, and I want to just show you a few examples of what regularly shows on the walls of our cities and what invades the space, the urban spaces in which most of us live. So this is very briefly, this is an example from the UK. It's for a brand, for a retailer called Tesco. It's a chain of supermarkets. This other poster is from the US. It's for Aches. It's a brand of men grooming products. Then we have another poster from France, closer to where I come from. It's for Perrier, and it just promotes their 150th anniversary in 2013. Then we have another one for the same brand. It just promotes, they promote themselves as sponsors of the Roland Garros International Tennis Tournament. So, as you can see, most of these posters, most of the printed advertising that all of us are used to, has a tendency to sort of lavishly occupy the space that is available to them. And this in order to sort of loudly make their commercial messages come across, as evidenced here by this mock ad. It's a mock ad for a stereotypical so-called detergent brand, or pseudo detergent brand. So what is most striking is that these commercial visuals are all very, what we would call busy in layman terms, and how they harness lots and lots of, or a large number of verbal and non-verbal signs in order to convey their messages. So technically this would be called, could be called saturation, but there's saturation in another acception or meaning from what Eric mentioned yesterday, but it's spatial saturation. And it would be the technical term to describe this expressive phenomenon. Now, the question is, semiotically speaking, what can we say in a broad brush way about this type of advertising? So those of you who were here yesterday have listened to Eric's explanations about his the interactional sociosemiotic model. So we have here a representation of this model with its four or various regimes of interaction. So we can find manipulation, programming, adjustment, and what he called assent, and that here is indicated as accident because it is the assent to the accident, assent to whatever happens. But in this model is not only a model about regimes of interactions, it's also a model about regimes of meaning or regimes of significance and regimes of risk. So we have three levels in each corner of the model. So I'm not really going to dwell on this model, but I will rather use it across my talk as a lens through which we'll be looking at the various advertising and marketing practices that I have chosen as my topic today. So, it will not come as a surprise to anybody, I suppose, if I first describe what I've just shown you as being first and foremost the expression, manifestation of a highly manipulative enterprise. And indeed, as you all know, the name of the game in marketing discourse is obviously to influence the prospective customer and to make them aspire to own and possess, acquire the items that manufacturers produce and distribute on the market, and of course promote in their advertising campaigns. Just to underpin this statement about the manipulative nature of advertising, I just want to show you some of the tools that are used behind the scenes by ad men. One of these tools is this type of document that presides over generation of such campaigns. Technically, it's called a copy strategy in the jargon of the profession. And it's, as you can see, it's composed of several pre-prepared boxes that the strategist just needs to fill. So it starts with the objective of the campaign, that is in fact the formulation of the intention of the sender manipulator to influence the market, to influence the recipient subject. The next box is the target audience. It is the description of this subject. It's the persona of the typical consumer that the advertising is supposed to attract. It is followed by the insight, what they call the insight, into the assumed needs or wants or desires of this stereotypical target consumer. Then it is followed by the brand promise, which defines the object of value to which the sender offers the subject to be conjoined. And this commitment is really the heart of the message, the advertising message. It is then substantiated by some sort of compelling argument or supporting evidence, which is supposed to render the promise credible and make, of course, the recipient subject buy into it and start its quest. And the proposition is finally encapsulated in some sort of zingy advertising slogan. So in standard semiotic narrative analysis, we could call this a contract, just as simple as that. Now, on top of being manipulators, advertising people or advertising strategists are also operators. That is to say, they are more precisely, they are programmers. And indeed, those in charge of strategy in advertising agencies are called planners. And the main reason for this job title is the fact that their mission rightly consists in planning programs. That is to say, planning sequences of effects that the advertising should cause amongst the target audience. This is what they call the expected consumer response to the advertising. And as predicted, so to speak, by the interactional model, such an overtly manipulative vision of advertising leads to envisage that it should conform to plans. That is to say, comply with pre-prepared linear algorithms which are made of causes and effects. So, very briefly, this chart shows several of these various algorithms used by the strategic planners in the advertising industry. We have 5 of them here, but all of them, or each of them, is based on the trichotomy of steps that shows in red on the left-hand side of the slide. Learn, feel, do, which respectively define the cognitive, affective, and behavioral stages expected to happen with the recipients. But in this case, each of these 5 models give a different detailed content for the steps in which the effects of the advertising should happen. Now, certain agencies have refined this programmatic equipment further by playing the 3-card trick with the order in which the sequence of steps should happen. For instance, here we have a model defined by one agency called FCB, stating that there is not a single universally working hierarchy of effects, and instead the order of learn, feel, do will depend on the type of purchase, i.e. be it rational or emotional, and the level of involvement of the consumer in the product category. For instance, paper towels trigger very low involvement and are not very much linked to feelings. On the contrary, a sports car, a Ferrari, is a feeling product and has a high involvement. So they have come up with 4 different algorithms that show here in red squares, and 4 corresponding types of advertising. So informative, effective, and so on and so forth. So to cut a long story short, from an interactional standpoint, we can firmly state that the standard advertising, that is advertising as we know it, is firmly grounded in what the theory, the socio-semiotic theory, describes as the constellation of prudence. It is in essence both manipulative and problematic. Now, having that in mind, we can get into the heart of the matter and see what advertising emptiness looks like. In order to do so, as I heralded at the beginning of my talk, I will illustrate it with the example of the Muji brand. But assuming that not many of you are familiar with this brand, I probably need to give you a few information about this brand. It's a very successful, thriving Japanese retail company that was founded in the 1980s and which sells a wide variety of household and consumer goods. They manufacture themselves, they design and manufacture and sell them to themselves. They claim to be a total lifestyle company or a total lifestyle brand that sells clothing, homeware, cosmetics, furniture, kitchen appliances, tableware, etc., etc., etc. They all design and manufacture themselves, all these products. They can be found in 900 shops around the world. Unfortunately, they have not reached Lithuania yet, but they will probably shortly. And their product catalogue comprises more than 7,000 items. Their full name, Muji Ryohin, translates into no-label good products, or, if you will, in better English, unbranded quality goods. In spite of this no-label ethos, Muji has a very significant brand recognition amongst consumers and professionals. Now, let me just say that this brand has nothing to do with the subvertising movement or the anti-globalization movement, or, for instance, the movement that was started in 2000 when Naomi Klein, the American journalist, published her book, No Logo. This has nothing to do with it, because it's a very capitalistic enterprise, and they make a lot of profit. This is what their products look like. So this is just a few samples of the products. Globally, overall, these products are sort of streamlined, minimalistic, almost generic products. Now, having that in mind, we can now have a look at their advertising. And this is a Muji advertising poster. And in fact, it is only a close-up on about half of it. The full poster is this. This is the full poster. As opposed to what I've shown you before at the beginning of the presentation, this is a rather amazing piece of advertising. It heavily contrasts with the saturation that I mentioned at the beginning. And as you can see, there is precisely not much to see, or to look at, or to read, if we use Landowski's terminology, which differentiates reading from grasping as two different ways to access to the significance of an object. So basically it's composed of, number one, a very distant skyline and a vast empty spatial area or landscape. Just for your information, this picture was shot in Bolivia at the Uyuni Salt Lake. And then we have, secondly, a solitary human being somewhere, which allows the beholder to get a flavor of the scale of the view. And lastly, or thirdly, a superb brand logo on top, on the right-hand side of the poster. And conversely to these posters that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, this huge poster, it's very big. I mean, it's 24 square meters, so 8 meters by 3. This huge poster is in fact pretty empty. It's indeed intended to represent emptiness. This is its Japanese version, so you can recognize the Muji logo written in kanji, overlapping the sky and the earth. And I will show you a few other examples of the same campaign. This is another one that was shot at the Uyuni Salt Lake in Bolivia as well. Third one. This one and the following one were shot in Mongolia. But wherever they were shot, this is not the point. The yurts in the far distance, the far distant background, are there to give a notion of the scale of this empty space again. They have the same function as the human being in the uni visuals. Now, there's probably no need to continue multiplying the examples, you get the point. These posters are from Muji, but they are also very reminiscent of, or even analogous, we should say, to this kind of traditional Japanese visual art. This one is one of the most famous Japanese paintings. It was produced in the 16th century by a painter called Hasegawa Tohaku. It's a screen, and it represents a pine forest covered in mist. And in the general economy of the picture, the blank empty spaces are in fact much more important or instrumental for the beholder than those that are painted. They're a kind of visual device that is instrumental, as I said, in allowing the eye of the beholder to float freely across the picture, and that allows, or that triggers his imagination. I mean, these empty blank spaces invite the recipient to guess what is hidden behind these empty spaces. Where does this globally recognized Japanese idiosyncrasy come from? That's a good question. And what does it imply in semiotic terms, more importantly, when it comes to what and how it signifies? One answer to that question is given by this gentleman. This gentleman is called Kenya Hara. He is Muji's art director, so he's the one who designed the posters that I showed you. He's in charge of designing Muji's communication campaigns. A number of the slides I'm going to show you later on are borrowed from him, from lectures he gives regularly, in which he shares his insight into the prime principles and explains where this concept of emptiness comes from. And according to him, emptiness has a very long history in Japan. It stems from antique Japanese religious beliefs and practices. This calligraphy in kanji reads and means Shinto, and can be translated literally as the way of the gods. And Shinto, or Shintoism, as you all know, is an animistic religion and the most ancient Japanese religion, dating back from antiquity. According to Hara, it is in this distant Japanese past that the origins of the value of emptiness can be found. Long before the Chinese introduced Buddhism into Japan, which only happened in the 6th century AD, the ancient Japanese believed that wisdom can be found in nature. They also believed that everything in nature, trees, rocks, rivers, mountains, earth, clouds, everything is possessed by spirits or gods that they call kamis. The Japanese refer to these kamis as Yaoyorozu no Kami, which means 8 million gods. That is to say that these gods are myriads of gods. So they are infinite and, more importantly, they are ubiquitous. And according to Shinto beliefs, nature being very fickle and delicate, there's no way to visit or make an appointment with these gods. So the only thing that can be done is to invite them as guests. So they invented this curious structure, which is an elementary shrine, which is still very common in Japan today. It's used in Shinto ceremonies. It's called shiro, which means blank or empty. It's made of 4 poles, erected in a square, with their tops joined by a straw rope. And inside this area there is nothing. That is, it is empty, and in fact it is emptiness made manifest or perceptible. And once this structure is created, the gods, the kamis, which see everything, cannot fail to notice, according to Shinto beliefs of course, They cannot fail to notice this empty space, and one or two of them may come to fill it, because emptiness holds in itself the possibility to be filled. That does not give any certainty, though, that they will enter. They may enter, and this may carries great weight in Shinto belief, because what people pray for is the possibility to interact with the deity, the possibility to be heard by the kami, and the possibility to be fulfilled. So people visit the shrine, and in its emptiness, they sense the potential presence of the deity. They pray and leave with a sense of having, again, potentially communed with the kami through this emptiness. To the Shinto believer, that's good enough. And this is the origin of a certain kind of Japanese communication, according to Kenyahara. So it seems that this notion of emptiness, understood as a potential receptacle for the divine, and therefore as a condition for a possible interaction with it, has taken on its meaning and value in the Japanese culture and ethos. And according to Hara, this is how this idiosyncratic amor vacui, this love of emptiness, was born and has become recognizably embedded in everything Japanese. It follows, according to Hara, that from this specifically Japanese and Shinto valuation of the vacuum, viewed as or understood, conceptualized as a reserve of interactional potentialities, that this amor vacui was cultivated by Muji. And indeed, as we saw, Muji communicates, or rather conveys in its communication, the notion of emptiness. Its advertising does not try to sing the praise of anything in particular. It carries no particular message. There is no precise content. Not even about the Muji brand itself. So the brand literally has no strategy, stricto sensu. It's not based on a creative brief, as I showed you, what was the copy strategy. So there is no target, no promise, no substantiation, no reason to believe, to make the message credible, and so on and so forth. It does not propose any contract to the subject, to the recipient subject, and it does not try to trigger any particular pre-prepared algorithms like those that I showed you earlier on. So the question is, how does this unusual communication device operate, and how can it work so successfully? Because it's a global campaign. I forgot to mention, this is not only Japanese, but it's also, this campaign is used across the world in every country where Muji has stores. Obviously, with the characteristics I've just described, this type of advertising resists the standard narrative description. There is no product, there is no objective value, and therefore there is no manipulator to give the object its value and make the recipient want it. Unlike the standard advertising practice that I briefly analyzed at the beginning, Muji's campaigns are not grounded in the principles of intentionality, nor are they based on the principle of regular causality there, but rather on the principle of availability or sensibility. We'll come back to that. The mechanism, so to speak, quote unquote, consists in harnessing, exploiting the potential of each interactant. The brand advert on the one hand and the recipient beholder on the other. It appeals to the sensibility of the response given by recipients to the sensible features of the advert. In other words, because it's not designed to manipulate its beholders or make them comply with prepared programs, it's really legitimate to state that this kind of advertising counts on the regime of adjustment, where the sense, the significance of the campaign is literally produced and grasped, but not read, grasped in the interaction itself. In Kenyaharu's words, music advertising is designed to be a creative receptacle, and he often describes it as an empty vessel that is ready to be filled by whatever the recipient come up with. That's to say that the advertising has the potential to trigger its beholders to draw on their potential resources, creative resources, to make sense of whatever each of them feels music to be. And because, according to Hara, it is also designed as a receptacle, the advertising equally has the potential to accommodate the outcome of this process. As a matter of fact, for music, the success of a campaign is not measured by the correct reception of the message by the audience, but rather by its ability to conjure up a multiplicity of images in their minds. So the advertising value of this visual emptiness is that the vacant spaces that are displayed in the posters offer a sort of endless potential of receptive capacity. This understanding of the concept of emptiness in advertising makes it a stance, a readiness to receive an input from outside, from the consumer, from the recipient. And advertising this way is sort of analogous to posing one question to as many people as possible and being fully ready, fully prepared to accept the huge variety of answers from them. Gremas himself had noted something similar in another field, the field of evangelical parables. When he studied them, he drew, after having studied the parables, some parables from the Gospels, he drew the conclusion that the peculiarity of the parable was the transfer of responsibility to the enunciatee of the text, the receiving subject of the message, to whom it is incumbent to interpret it, to choose the right answer to the question posed by the parable. Now, amongst these varied answers, if we come back to music, are the following perceptions, and of course the list is not exhaustive. Some people will view music as the standard bearer of a simpler, better way of life. Many people will buy into its poetic refinement, or will even believe that it represents the epitome or the quintessence of Japanese minimalistic design. A number of people will associate the brand with naturalness. They will believe that it is a responsible brand that saves global resources, that is ecologically friendly, and so on and so forth. And maybe others may just find it simply economical and low cost, because they view music as a very rational brand with a rational approach to product and pricing. However, conversely to standard brands that very often rely on these brand images to create their messages in order to steer the brand image into a given direction, music's communication uses none of these perceptions. Having generated them, it is also receptive to all. This means that by being so quiet, by being so silent, by being so empty, music do put themselves in danger. With a regime of adjustment that music chooses to implement, nothing is really safe, unlike the regime of manipulation. Nothing is sure, unlike the regime of programming. There's a high level of uncertainty attached to the regime of adjustment. It leads Muji to run a major risk, that is the risk of falling into its neighboring regime, that is the regime of accident here, under the auspices of randomness. And this is precisely one of the characteristics of the regime of adjustment in the model. Adjustment as a regime of interaction and significance, leading to, according to the model, the creation of an unprecedented sense necessarily entails to embark on its corresponding regime of risk, and that is labeled in the model as insecurity. And that I personally, in other analyses, have labeled precariousness. And just as Landowski literally puts it, adjustment is indeed, as you can read, a regime of interaction where the best can only be achieved by responsibly taking the risk of the worst, and where the mutual fulfillment of both partners borders the accident. So in the case in point, if this, or should this accident happen, this is what the empty vessel should look like in the end. This kind of advertising takes a big risk from a marketing point of view, the risk of being misunderstood, or even worse, the risk of generating perplexity, that is to say, of triggering no understanding at all, leaving the beholders disconcerted, unable to precisely make sense of what they are looking at. In that instance, the receptacle would accommodate only bewildered question marks here. And these disorientated question marks can obviously be quickly replaced by negative remarks. This kind of advertising may lead recipients to think of Muji as a puzzling, esoteric, obscure brand with incomprehensible, far-fetched communication, etc., etc. And this is not only a danger in terms of brand image, as you can imagine, but it's also a high financial hazard, meaning money unwisely spent on counterproductive advertising, which in our neoliberal economies is, as you all know, a mortal sin. Falling into the regime of accidents signifies that the communication may well eventuate as meaningless to some of its recipients. This necessarily implies that despite this effort to embrace as many people as possible as we saw, this policy inevitably leads to segment beholders or to segment consumers and divide them into two groups, which we will cover more in depth lately. On the one hand, you have those consumers or recipients who like to be helped, who like to be directed, who like to be told what to understand, and who are precisely those who are likely to be puzzled by this very unusual advertising. And on the other hand, you have more free-spirited, more independent-minded people who like to apprehend things by themselves, and who, on the contrary, are likely to enjoy and happily buy into this type of advertising. So, as I said, we'll come back to this dichotomy later. So, to summarize, by responsibly taking the risk, or by responsibly taking this possible randomness and hazard into account, Muji is prepared to be endangered and give its assent to whatever happens as a result in this very unusual communication process. Therefore, we can state that its advertising encompasses both regimes of adjustment and an accident or assent, which is what in the model is described as the constellation of adventure, where the world of significance is much less stable and much less reassuring than in the other constellation. As in this constellation is not founded on immutable laws of causality or based on contracts and instructions that simply need to be followed to the letter. And indeed, it's probably not exaggerated to state that Muji is somewhat of an adventurous brand. Now, this emptiness does not only apply to advertising, but also applies to product design. In his talks, Kanehara often uses or gives an enlightening example of what emptiness means in terms of product design. So I have borrowed this example to explain how it works. If we take two knives, one on the left is a Henkel's knife, it's from Germany. The other on the right is a Japanese traditional Yanagiba sushi knife. And I propose to have a closer look at their respective handles. The Henkel's knife is ergonomically designed so that when you hold it, your thumb naturally finds its place, or finds a natural place to rest. And it's got a high level of what designers or ergonomists call affordance. And this affordance makes it very easy to hold and use. The object instructs you how to use it, and it instructs you what to do. Meanwhile, the handle of the Yanagiba is a flat and plain wooden rod, a flat cylinder. The shape of the handle doesn't instruct you where to hold it and how to hold it. So you can hold it anywhere, in any way you wish. This plain, unsophisticated handle can receive all the techniques of the Japanese chefs. In short, the essence of the concept of emptiness applied to product design is a treatise against over-engineered objects. The German knife is simple insofar as it is ergonomically designed to fit the hand of the cook and to anticipate the user's grip, and giving the thumb a natural place to rest. But Japanese chefs prefer a much less programmed tool to hold as they want, and in that sense, the Yanagiba is empty. And in Kanehara's words, a flat handle is not seen as raw or poorly crafted. On the contrary, its perfect plainness is meant to say, you can use me whichever way suits your skills. The Japanese knife accommodates the cook's skill and not the cook's thumb. Another quotation from Kanehara: when an object is empty, it is ready to receive any image or use. And another one: emptiness is the pursuit of ultimate freedom. So, from a semiotic standpoint, this is what we can make of those two knives. As said, the Henkel's knife is very simple, but the Yanagiba is empty. Both are beautiful and wonderful knives, no doubt, but from an interactional standpoint, there is a crystal clear difference. One falls into the regime of programming, where you just follow the instructions, and these instructions are the same every time you use it, so it's based on regular causality, and it's a programmed tool. The other knife falls into the regime of adjustment, where you have to invent your own way to hold it, and are free to change it anytime and improvise with it. And it's based on this other principle, which is not causality, but availability. The knife is available to you, and you can make yourself available to the knife. This example from Kanehara is for those of you who know Jean-Marie Floch's work, probably very reminiscent of his brilliant analysis of the difference between two types of multitask folding knives. The Swiss Army knife on the left-hand side, that he called a knife for engineers, and the Opinel knife on the right-hand side that he called the knife of the bricoleurs. They contrast in exactly the same way as the Heckler's knife and the Yanagida. And this is what Erik Landowski wrote about Floch's analysis of the two knives in one of his articles. I don't know if it's been translated into Lithuanian, but the French title of this article is Avoir prise, donner prise. So it's my translation into English. As he, Jean-Marie Floch, proceeds in the analysis of the two types of operations, those carried out respectively by a bricoleur with an Opinel and an engineer with a Swiss Army knife, the interpretation that he proposes goes in a direction that is increasingly close to what we, Erik Landowski, a few years later, defined in terms of adjustment on the one hand and in terms of programming and operations on the other. And along the same line, continuing the parallel between Hara, Floch and Landowski, these comparisons and differences are also highly reminiscent of Landowski's distinction between the two ways to make use of an object. You can either utilize an object or practice it. His definitions can be found in particular, Voiture et Peinture. It's another article. And this distinction between utilize and practice leads to bringing to light two broad schools or two ideologies of product design. One which posits that the designer's job is to come up with objects whose affordance has been optimized in order to make the user's life simple by complying with them. And another design school, represented by Hara, posits that the designer's job is to come up with open-ended, undetermined objects, we can call them empty. That is to say, objects whose purpose remains as minimal as possible, so that the user feels himself free to creatively invent his own way to make use of them. In order to further explain what the designer's job is, Hara has invented a word, which is exformation. This neologism designates the opposite of information. Information being the traditional task of the designer, who seeks to achieve affordance in the object in order to simplify, if you will, the life of the end user. If we dwell a moment on this notion of exformation, invented by Ken Hara, we can say that exforming an object entails to streamline it, to get rid of any frills, of any extra design that other more traditional designers could be tempted to include in it. It's a careful process of elimination, subtraction of gratuitous features and design unrelated to the basic function of the object. That said, the operations of exformation have a limit, of course, that the designer cannot cross. The limit that would lead to the nonsense, that is to say, which would go so far as to make the object unrecognizable and unknowable by people. Kenya Hara uses the phrase, make things unknown, to describe these operations. But despite this, it does not mean that exformation pursues the unintelligible. From a Platonist perspective, if you will, this exformation entails to produce the perceptible manifestation of the generic idea of the object. So no less, no more. And in semiotic terms, exformation means for the designer to produce an object whose configurative, taxic, and functional descriptions, according to the three components that Cremas defined, and according to him, these three dimensions determining any object. So these three components can only be reduced to the small, irreducible set of elementary features which constitute the minimum definition into which the object belongs. The definition of a class, sorry, to which the object belongs. So if I briefly illustrate this with simplistic, very trivial examples, here we have two coat hangers. One is designed with instructions on the left-hand side, the other one by Muji, without any instruction on the right-hand side. The same applies to an example of X-formed pack and graphic designs. It's for a hair care product line by Muji, which heavily contrasts with its equivalent by L'Oréal. Now, if we try to go a little further prior to concluding my talk, we can try to synthesize what we have analyzed so far. This is a visualization of Gemleff's definition of a sign, with its two planes, migrated from Saussure, but more importantly with its two strata per plane, the stratum of the substances and the stratum of the invariable forms. Jean-Marie Floch often harnessed this definition of a sign, Gemleff's definition of a sign, and adapted it in the context of his brand analysis. For him, for Floch, the substance of content of a brand consists of the conceptual universes in which the brand operates. In other words, its substance of content covers the business sectors, the product categories, the markets or market segments in which the brand manifests itself. The substance of expression of a brand refers to the techniques, the media, the raw materials processed and shaped by a given brand to manufacture its manifestations. The form of content of a brand is the level which accommodates the way in which the brand considers and positions itself vis-à-vis the conceptual universes in which it operates. It is where the brand asserts the way in which it structures its environment as a whole. It is where the brand defines its difference from its competitors. It is also where the singularity of any brand lies, where its philosophy, its vision of the world, or its relationship to others, both competitors and consumers, are deposited. In this stratum that Floch will end up calling the brand ethics, this is the stratum which is the hardcore of the brand. It is its stance. The brand ethics, in fact, gathers the conditions for a brand to be loyal to itself across time. And lastly, for the form, as for the form of expression, this is the perceptible level where the specific sensitive attributes of a given brand appear. Its style, its cues, its clues are located there, and they mark the brand production and endow them with a unique hand or a unique touch, with a sort of inimitable craftsmanship. Floch labeled this stratum brand aesthetics, and it gathers the conditions for a brand to be recognized. So, for Floch, who was inspired by Paul Ricoeur's concept of narrative identity, the essence of a brand is both the stance and the style. That is to say, the articulation of an ethics with an aesthetics, both planes being by definition united. So coming back to Muji, it's easy now to apply Floch's model, and we can easily state that Muji's ethics can be summarized by the notion of emptiness, considered as a reservoir of potentials, as we saw it, insofar as Muji places this concept of emptiness at the heart, not only of its design practice, but also of its relationship or interaction with its consumers and recipients in advertising. And symmetrically, we can also state that Muji's aesthetics is characterized by the art of exformation, that is the skill to carefully eliminate what's unnecessary from whatever the brand embarks on, be it advertising, be it product design, be it packaging, and so on and so forth. So we can now have a closer look at one of these brand signs from which we started our journey to emptiness. This poster represents the Bolivian Union Salt Lake that we saw at the beginning, and we can now look at it more precisely. The techniques, media, and raw materials that compose its substance of expression are obvious. We have a two-dimensional space, there is photography, there are words, typography, layout and printing techniques, etc., etc. The universes in which Muji operates and that compose its substance of content are not only those of Muji's direct and indirect competitors, other retailers or power brands, but it's also the world of advertising as a whole. It is a stance against the whole advertising as a whole. These substances are then taken charge of by the forms. The exformation of the substance of expression results in a pared-down aesthetic style with no copy, no message, no tagline, no product shot, and as little information as possible. And this perceptible approach is the twin of Muji's conceptual stance or conceptual ethics of emptiness, according to which it is up to the beholder to invent what Muji means, what Muji stands for, and in other words, to fill this empty vessel, as Kanehara calls it. At the end of the day, emptiness is about making space for the potential of the creative imagination of the recipient to flourish. And Kanehara puts it in a very simple way. Looking at this poster, he just said, well, there is nothing, and yet there is potentially everything. This analysis of the corporate campaign also applies to product campaigns. This is not a poster, this is a press ad. And because Kanehara has a lot of consideration for the brand essence, that is for brand ethics and the brand aesthetics, he comes up with this kind of silent product advertising. This is a poster for a table, and it says nothing about the table. But very much like in their stores, instead of naming a product with its intended purpose, like a coffee table, or dinner table, or kitchen table, or whatever, bedside table, Muji will prefer open-ended definitions, and they will say this is an oak table, full stop. This gives the client, the customer, the creative freedom to designate the table's ultimate purpose by himself. So I will briefly show you a few other examples of product campaigns. This is for a cupboard. This one is for footed mattresses. Here you have a series of filers. There a series of pencils. And I want to dwell on this last one, which promotes a shelf. None of these ads, as you have seen, gives any information. They just show products in a way that leaves full flexibility for the recipients to determine how they want to make use of them. And this is what conceptual emptiness is about. And as you've seen, the products are also shown in empty landscapes and backgrounds, so that the visuals sort of wake the beholder to that emptiness and trigger their imagination and creativity. They all give the recipients the freedom to develop their own way to assign a function to the object and eventually to mutually adjust to one another in a way which fully exploits their respective potentials. For instance, this shelf, this piece of furniture here, may turn into a bookshelf, a bathroom or garage storage unit, a display case, a garderobe, etc., etc. It's now time to summarize and conclude. As an initial conclusion, we can state that the approach chosen by Muji to design, to market, and to promote the objects that they manufacture introduce a complete shift in the old world of standard marketing practice. It's a sort of rejuvenating change of paradigm. So we have here the old marketing paradigm, so I'm not going to dwell too much on it, we've seen that. We've got subjects with expectations and wants, then we have a manipulator which offers objects to be used, which better meet these needs, and we finally end up with advertising that is based on careful strategies and sharp planning. So that's the old marketing paradigm. The new leg of the broadened marketing paradigm, the new leg that is introduced by Muji, is this one. So we can say that Muji plays the same game as the others. It is not, as I said, the fruit of a self-advertising movement or an anti-globalization movement. No. Muji is a capitalistic enterprise which is turned to make profit. But although they play that game, they have infringed the rules. They have chosen another battleground, so to speak. They are not in search of certainty and safety as all the other marketers. They cultivate a sense of insecurity that borders hazard, as we saw. And this adventurism translates in the fact that they do not rely on assumptions about their customers' needs or their customers' wants, but they rely on their potential, availability, and their sensibility. So they don't look for any superiority in their products. They don't look for any greater affordance. On the contrary, they prefer less programmed products which are free of agenda, free of instructions. And X-formation of this way allows them to come up with empty, practicable products that are open-ended and therefore allow their users to develop and invent their own way to use them. And this is what we analyze in terms of adjustment. So this very same approach has led them, as we've seen, to develop this open-ended, empty type of communication, whose content and meaning, again, has to be invented by the recipients. With this new paradigm, the question is the following. Is it still a question of, for the subjects to, is it still a question of choosing between more or less pre-programmed objects, or does the nature of the choice change? We can make the following assumption. This conception of marketing introduced by Muji in the general economy of brands cannot be reduced to a mere proposition of new objects on top of those already existing out there, but it can be understood as a proposition of a way of doing and thereby a way of being with and through these objects, or even beyond, as a way to experience them by practicing them, whereby, in fact, instead of choosing things, one chooses oneself, a self. And this is what Eric Landowski proposed to term a meta-choice. So, basically, when it comes to making choices, the subject can rely on two elementary options. Either he listens to what others say, to what the uses, the norms, the opinions, or tastes prevailing around him tell him, and in that case, his identity and status have an exogenous origin, or, on the other hand, he can search for himself and by himself what the objects of his desire are, and trust his own experience and feelings in the direct presence of the objects, of the sensitive qualities of the external world, through the proprioceptive apprehension that his own senses allow. His identity and status, therefore, have an endogenous origin. So, on the one hand, in the standard Brand's camp, we find the figure of the programmer, whose own plans have been anticipated by smart and shrewd marketers and designers, and who has to conform to the affordance of the objects that have been thought out in his stead, and thereby finds himself programmed in his turn. So we have the programmer. Choosing such brands and being loyal to them is somehow equivalent to swearing allegiance to these brands, acknowledging them with a transcendent authority that they impose all the more easily as they do not even need to use force to do so. And in that sense, the definition of the ancient Roman cliens, in his freely consented relation of subjection and fidelity to the auctoritas of the noble benefactor, fully corresponds to that definition of that type of subject. So choosing this option amounts to defining oneself as a client in the most original, literal, and etymological sense of the term. On the other hand, in the other camp, where we have Muji, we find the figure of the amateur, or the poacher, if we use Michel de Certeau's precise terminology, who denies any form of authority, and therefore is the antithesis of the clients. The amateur is a free-spirited improviser who, as a poacher, to use again Michel de Certeau's terminology, trespasses the fences of corporate rules, and as a maverick has a liking for transgressing the rules. The poacher never takes things at their face value, but interprets, or rather reinterprets them in his own way. He's somewhat of a resistant fighter to the system, if you will, and to him, any merchandise can be somehow turned into something that it was not intended for. So the amateur is also a pleasure seeker in his quest of singular sensory encounters, and conversely to the programmer, who is happy to be influenced and dictated what to do and what to be in reality, the amateur is a loose cannon. He's got open-mindedness, and his intrinsic sensibility and permanent availability to whatever happens to him can happily accommodate such undetermined and empty objects as Muji's products and Muji's advertising that impose nothing, but because they apparently have no precise usage or meaning, are therefore available for many, including and especially those of his own invention. So I will conclude now. Sorry. What have I done? Yeah, at the end of the day, I think that Muji's success, in fact, teaches marketers a good lesson. Despite of its no-label ethos, it's just a pretense. It's a brand. In its own right. Muji behaves as a brand worthy of the name. Because if markets today are more and more saturated with products that are more and more undifferentiated and interchangeable, more and more insignificant, it is probably because standard brands have been sleeping on their laurels and have fallen into the insignificant routine of thought, like, conforming to unquestioned ways of working, mere repetition of proven successful recipes, and so on and so forth. So I want to finish this presentation with this quotation by a professor of marketing, a famous French professor of marketing, Benoît Lebrun, who specializes rightly in the study of brand management. And the quotation reads, you've got it, "A brand worthy of the name should not be reduced to a mere prose of production. It should rather be considered from the angle of the poetics of creation, considering that creating has nothing to do with producing. A brand mission should be about creating possibilities, about liberating possibilities of life, capable of increasing both our power of sensitivity and our enjoyment of living. This is why a brand should absorb us in the order of life and not in that of representation. Is it not this aesthetic, ethical awakening of brands that could constitute a possible last defense against the lurking disenchantment of our industrial economies?" His last question raises another, which will end my presentation. Is this not precisely what Muji does already, and rather successfully? Thank you very much.
Mes girdėjome pranešimą, kuris sudaro tam tikrą, gal ne opoziciją, bet radikalų skirtumą pirmajam pranešimui šios dienos, tiek savo objektų, tiek metodu. Tai yra, pirmajame pranešime buvo kalbama apie objektus šiukšlės, kurios užpildo ir perpildo erdvės. Čia mes turime reikalą su tuštuma. Pirmajame pranešime mes matėme, kokiu būdu tai analizuojama fenomenologiškai, čia mes matėme, kaip tai analizuojama semiotiškai. Laukiam klausimą. Laiko nedaug liko, bet...
Thank you much. A couple of additions. One, and that is the bell curve during that time will be Zen silence.
Which one, sorry?
Advertisements are silent.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, they are clean.
Yes.
Yes. Very clean.
Yes, yes. Yes, absolutely.
Another aspect is this, that the openness, let's say the sushi knife, also requires a very fantastic practice.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
You don't pick up and say, I'll just slice the fish. It's 1 millimeter slice. So it's almost like samurai training in that respect.
Yeah.
That's when you can disclose the emptiness, because you are totally lost. You're not required. Okay, you become the very event, and so that the practice is very precise. Another aspect is that in Japanese there is a great security. That way they can step out into the emptiness. The family, the tradition that they keep, it's almost. Every gesture is understandable. So the emptiness, like no theater, you know, we step out into the universe, and but there is a home. There is the miniature little thing, a little cup, Zen, tea practice and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Non, c'est juste un commentaire.
Galbūt klausimų?
Thank you very much. This is very interesting to listen. I have a question about the way emptiness is represented, and it is represented by nature. You have, I mean, from my point of view, the way I saw the posters, and then the which is obvious, obviously, he uses natural landscapes.
Yes.
So they're not empty, really.
No, yes.
Do you make of that anything? Does it come into the philosophy of this brand or anything? I mean, it does carry a message, doesn't it?
Ne marche pas. Ne marche plus.
works.
No, it doesn't.
Niekas nebeveikia, ir šitas neveikia. Ir šitas neveikia, ne, kažkas čia ryšys gal.
Nusėdo.
Battery's out.
Yes, battery's out.
Ir šitas taip.
Veikia jūs?
Ne. Veikia.
Yeah.
Thank
you for your question. Yes, Kenya Hara chose to shoot natural landscapes rightly because, according to him, this lot of emptiness stems from, as I explained, the Shinto beliefs, and Shinto is as we saw, an animistic religion that has a love of nature and who believes that everything in nature is possessed by those kamis. Now, it's a very good question. They are not totally empty. Of course, they are just a manifestation of emptiness. Should these posters be empty, completely empty? That is to say, completely white, with absolutely nothing, not even a brown logo, then this would fall into the trap of the risk that I mentioned about the designer's exploration purpose. That is to say that exploration has a limit, which is to avoid falling into the unintelligible. So if these posters were completely blank with just white, a white surface with nothing on it and no logo, then it wouldn't be advertising anymore. So we would have fallen into the trap that I tried to mention by quoting Renas and by explaining that exploration really has a limit. So it is something that I thought a lot about, and I believe that he tried to minimize what these posters represent, to really minimize, to optimize the mechanism of the posters so they can still be looked at as advertising and not as a whiteboard. But yet, being advertising, conveying a sense of surprise, of emptiness, of a sense of, ooh, what do I make of this? So there are two elements of answers. One is Shinto, with its beliefs in nature and in kamis in nature, and the other one is the limit of this exercise of exformation, exforming advertising. If we were to make it completely empty, would not be advertising anymore. So there's a minimal element, there's a minimal amount of elements that have to be there to just say, this is advertising, but nothing else. So this is what emptiness is in advertising terms. But I could have shown you other examples of emptiness without nature. So, a few years later, there was a campaign about homes. And the campaign showed empty apartments. Not finished, with concrete on the walls and pipes all over the place. So this is really the limit. Well, did you get a loop? Oh, okay, fine.
Ar dar būtų galbūt klausimų?
It's not probably a question, but remark. You spoke just about objects, all kinds of objects, not in the semiotic sense, in the ordinary sense. But all what you said might be applied to subjects. I mean, in the ordinary language, persons, others.
Mm-hmm.
Because persons, just as the objects, for instance, the chair, there is a person here, this person as just as this object here is socially thematized, defined, characterized. This is a chair, this is a participant conference, and a lot of determination are pre-existence. This person has spectacles, he wears such and such clothes and so on. So this chair is meant to sit, it is comfortable or not, and all that. So the process that Mougy invites us to do is to somehow forget, put aside all social predeterminations of the objects.
Yes.
Of chairs and everything. But we could extend this and invite people, not being Mougy, but being, I don't know what exactly, and invite people to put aside, get rid of all determinations that we have in mind about persons, and try to view these things which we call persons as empty.
Yes.
And then instead of being in relation with, for instance, a teacher, a woman, maybe a Lithuanian, maybe a teacher, maybe I don't know what, in conversation, we at the beginning of the meeting, we meet and we say, we introduce, I am from France, I am a musician, oh no, I am a musician. Instead of that, to try and enter in relationship with the minimum existence of this thing, which is the person, how to say, delivery.
Freed from
all these labels which our social existence invite us to put on
people, right?
And then this means that, of course, it would not be emptiness completely, because it is necessary that there be a partner. But this partner, reduced to a very, very, very little determination, would permit each other in the relationship to develop an interaction which would not be programmed by programmers, that is to say, by society. We would be with the possibility of letting the potential of each other in the relationship grow, develop in a way which is not pre-established by anything. So we would create something together, and this would be perfect adjustment and liberty, as you say, the creation of value and so on. But there must be, it is problematic, but it is necessary that there be a partner, an interaction, that is something, someone, with the less determination as possible, so that it must be reciprocal, especially in intersubjective relationships, to create a new subjectivity which is interactively created, starting from almost nothing.
Yes.
Like an extension of Mougy.
Si je me permets mon rôle de président, je veux dire que ce que tu proposes, c'est déjà fait en philosophie par Lévinas, quand on parle de l'éthique et quand on essaie d'écrire en quoi l'autre est différent de sujets ordinaires, éthiques, quelconques, donc décrits dans les rapports ordinaires. Donc, il propose la même chose sur le plan que tu proposes, la même chose sur le plan éthique que tu proposes sur le plan encore plus général. Aš atsiprašau, čia kadangi aš nekalbu angliškai, tai aš prancūziškai jam pasakiau, pasakysiu, kaip tą pasakiau, o gal dar Žan-Polis norės pakomentuoti. Tai, ką čia Baltos pasiūlė, tai filosofija, konkrečiai etinės filosofijos kontekste, visą tai siūlo Levinas, kai jis aprašinėja santykį su kitu. Bet aš daugiau nekomentuoju ir perduodu žodį. Tu veux répondre aux commentaires de...
Non, je suis tout à fait d'accord.
Tai dar atsiprašau.
This might be a very simple question, but I'm just curious if you have any comments. Is there any relationship between the time and the successfulness of Muji brand, especially right here, like right at this the start, and maybe we have maybe there's a certain time when this I think you can call it even a trend of emptiness started, and how is there a time when it will end, do you think? Because I've noticed that there's there's a trend of this emptiness, and I can notice that in Lithuanian products and in general, and I'm just curious if there's some kind of relations with time. Timing.
Thank you. I haven't really thought about it, but it's probably very likely. I mean, there is a moment when our economic, capitalistic system is coming to an end. I mean, it's saturated. As a freelance marketing consultant, I work a lot with manufacturers, with brands, and more and more products launched, rolled out on the market, just look like other products. I mean, there is, as I said, markets are saturated by undifferentiated products, which being undifferentiated are more and more insignificant. Therefore, brands have not managed to do their jobs properly. So it was probably not intentional from UG, but what they proposed sort of echoed a fatigue by consumers. Consumers is just bored to death. I mean, when you have to choose between 3 or 4 shampoos, then it's not the same honeysuckle, or it's not the same flavor or herb. I mean, what's the point? I mean, they are all the same. So there's probably a notion, an explanation linked to present times. But of course, I also think that what I presented is interesting per se, independently of any circumstances. But the circumstances weren't probably very much in favor of Muji's policy. That can be hypothesized. Yes, very much so.